Sign the form or lose everything you built. My brother did not say good morning. He did not ask how I was holding up after the funeral. He just slid a document across my grandmother's kitchen table and told me I had 72 hours to hand over my share of her estate. My cousin was standing behind him, arms crossed, nodding like a bouncer. I looked at the paper. It was a deed transfer. My name was on it, but the signature line at the bottom already had my brother's initials penciled in, like he had rehearsed this so many times he forgot I was the one who needed to sign. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at the form, then at my brother, and thought, he has no idea who he is sitting across from. My job title is estate litigation paralegal. I have spent 8 years at one of the largest law firms in Toronto helping lawyers tear apart fraudulent wills, forged deeds, and manipulated probate filings. I know exactly how people hide assets in plain sight. I know which documents look official but fall apart under a notary's second look. And sitting in my grandmother's kitchen in Kitchener, Ontario, the smell of her lavender hand cream still faint in the curtains, I realized I had spent nearly a decade protecting strangers from exactly what my brother was trying to do to me. To explain why I did not throw him out on the spot, I need to tell you what kind of family I grew up in. I call it the golden child economy. Every family has a currency. In ours, it was attention. My brother had been the investment, the one the whole family poured resources into, expectations into, hope into. He was 4 years older, charming, in a way that made adults forget to ask questions, and he had learned early that our family's approval was a renewable resource as long as he directed it away from me. I was not hated. That would have been simpler. I was just consistently considered less interesting, less promising, less worth the effort. My grandmother was the only exception. She had seen something in me, the rest of them had not. When I was 16 and the family talked about how my brother would go to university, she quietly opened an RESP for me, a registered education savings plan, with her own savings. She never announced it at dinner. She never held it over my head. She just handed me an envelope one Sunday morning with a bank statement inside and said, "You are going somewhere, my girl, and I want to make sure you have gas money." That RESP funded my college at the University of Waterloo. Every textbook, every semester, every late night in the library was paid for by the woman who smelled like lavender and never once made me feel like a burden. She died in February. A quiet Tuesday morning. The kind of gray winter day that feels like the sky is holding its breath. She was 81, and she went peacefully, and I sat beside her for the last 3 hours, because I was the one who answered the phone when the care home called. Not my brother, not my aunt, me. I was the one who held her hand, while her breathing slowed. I was the one who called the funeral home, arranged the service, wrote her obituary. I was the one who knew her favorite hymn, and made sure it played at the right moment. My brother showed up at the reception in a new jacket, and cried in a way that made sure everyone in the room could see him doing it. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral at the office of her solicitor in downtown Kitchener. I already knew the rough contents because my grandmother had told me herself. Not everything, but enough. She had been clear with me in the last year of her life. She said she wanted the house to go to me because I was the one who had looked after her, driven her to her appointments at Grand River Hospital, sat with her during her cataract surgery, helped her navigate the Service Ontario forms for her benefits renewal. She said the house was mine and she wanted that in writing. What I did not know until I arrived at the solicitor's office was that my brother had gotten there first. He was already seated when I walked in, and the solicitor, a tired-looking man named Mr. Gallagher, was shuffling papers with the expression of someone who had already had a difficult morning. My brother's girlfriend was there, which was odd, because she had met my grandmother exactly twice. My aunt sat on the far side of the room, not looking at me. The solicitor read the standard language, the accounts, the personal effects, the small cash bequest to a local charity my grandmother had supported for years. And then he came to the property, the house at 44 Elmwood Crescent, Kitchener, Ontario, to be transferred to my brother. I sat very still. I did not react. I have spent 8 years in a law office where composure is the only currency that matters. I looked at Mr. Gallagher and I asked, in the most professionally neutral voice I could produce, if I could see the page referencing the property transfer. He slid it across. I read it once. Then I flipped to the execution page, and I looked at the date. The amendment to the will had been signed 11 days before my grandmother died. She had been in the memory care wing of the facility at that point. She had been on a medication protocol that her attending physician had noted, in her file, significantly impaired her capacity for complex decision-making. I knew this because I had been the one sitting in those appointments. I had been the one reading her care notes. My brother had gotten her to sign a codicil amending the property transfer while she was medicated and alone and I was not there. I put the page down. I thanked Mr. Gallagher for his time. I shook hands with no one. I walked out to my car in the parking lot on Frederick Street, and I sat for 4 minutes doing the kind of breathing my therapist taught me for moments when I need to think before I act. Then I called my supervising lawyer, Patricia Wren, who had been doing estate litigation in Ontario for 26 years, and who had once described fraudulent codicils as the cockroaches of estate law, because they are everywhere, and they are very hard to kill. Patricia said 3 words. Save every document. I already was. The next morning my brother arrived at my apartment in Guelph. He brought coffee from Tim Hortons, double for him, black for me, as if he remembered something kind about me and wanted credit for it. He sat down at my kitchen table and explained the situation with the patience of a man who believed he was managing a minor inconvenience. He said the codicil was legal and witnessed. He said Mr. Gallagher had confirmed it. He said he understood this was hard for me, but that it was what our grandmother had wanted in the end. He said he was willing to give me 90 days to remove my belongings from the Elmwood Crescent property before he listed it with a realtor. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. I told him I needed a few days to process everything. I told him this was a lot to absorb, and asked if he could give me until the end of the week before we talked further. He leaned back in his chair with the particular satisfaction of a man who mistakes silence for surrender. He told me to take my time. He said there was no rush. He had no idea that by the time he walked out of my apartment, I had already photographed the codicil he left on my table, identified the witnessing signatures, and texted Patricia a question about the mental capacity assessment requirements under Ontario's Substitute Decisions Act. She replied in 11 minutes. She said, if they didn't do a capacity assessment before that signing, the codicil is void. There was no capacity assessment. I had my grandmother's full medical file, because I was listed as her healthcare proxy. I requested the records from the care facility that same afternoon under FIPA, the Personal Health Information Protection Act. What came back was a nursing note dated the morning of the codicil signing. It noted that my grandmother had been confused about the day and year, had called a nurse by her deceased sister's name, and had been given an increased dose of her anxiety medication following a difficult night. The physician's quarterly assessment from the same week had checked the box, indicating moderate cognitive impairment. She had been unable to form testamentary capacity on that day. The codicil was executed on a day she legally could not have signed it. I did not call my brother. I let him sit in his certainty for a few more days. What I needed next was to understand the full scope of what had been done. I requested the visitor log from the care facility for the 3 months before my grandmother's death. In Ontario, long-term care homes are required to keep these records. My name appeared 47 times. My brother's name appeared 3 times, all in the last 2 weeks of her life, all after she had been moved to the higher needs wing. One of his visits coincided exactly with the date of the codicil signing. I also pulled the witness signatures from the codicil document. There were 2. One was my cousin, who had been in that room with my brother on the day he brought the transfer form to my kitchen table. The second signature was someone I did not recognize. I ran the name through the Law Society of Ontario registry. She was a notary in Waterloo Region. I looked up her professional disciplinary history. There was a notation from 4 years ago, a citation for witnessing a document without adequately confirming the signatory's identity. Nothing that disqualified her. But enough. I brought everything to Patricia. She sat with it for 40 minutes while I waited in the client chairs outside her office. When she came out, she had the expression she gets when she has found the pressure point in a case. She said we had enough to file a challenge under the Succession Law Reform Act. She said we had the medical records, the visitor logs, the notary's prior citation, and we had something else she had found when she looked more carefully at the codicil itself. The formatting was inconsistent with Mr. Gallagher's standard templates. 2 of the clause numbers were out of sequence. The font in the property description line was a slightly different weight than the rest of the document. It had been edited after it was printed. Someone had changed the property description on a signed page. Patricia said the word quietly, almost to herself, the way she does when something has moved from complicated to serious. She said, document fraud. Now I had a decision to make. I could file immediately, go to Ontario Superior Court, challenge the codicil through formal probate litigation, which would take 18 to 24 months, cost both sides significantly, and put my grandmother's estate into a legal freeze while everything waited. Or I could do what I had been quietly preparing for the last 2 weeks, which was to let my brother and my aunt and my cousin walk into a room where they believed they had already won, and show them what I had been building in the dark. Patricia arranged a mediation session. She told their side it was a routine estate meeting to discuss the distribution timeline. She said I was prepared to discuss options. Their lawyer, a man who introduced himself with the confident energy of someone billing by the hour, arrived with my brother and my aunt looking like they were here to collect a check. The mediation room was on the 4th floor of a building on King Street. 1 long table, a mediator who had agreed to serve as a neutral party, and a court reporter Patricia had arranged to document the session. Their side did not question the reporter. They assumed she was administrative. The mediator opened by asking each party to state their understanding of the dispute. My brother's lawyer spoke for 6 minutes. He described the codicil as a legal and properly executed amendment. He described me as a grieving family member struggling to accept my grandmother's final wishes. He used the phrase of sound mind twice. He said my grandmother had expressed verbally, on multiple occasions, her desire to leave the primary asset to her grandson. The mediator turned to Patricia. Patricia said, "We have some documents to walk through." She placed the nursing note on the table first. The note from the morning of the signing, the one documenting confusion, a medication increase, and a quarterly assessment indicating moderate cognitive impairment. She placed it face up in the center of the table. My brother's lawyer leaned forward. My brother's face did not change, but his jaw moved once, like he was resetting something. Then Patricia placed the physician's quarterly report. Then the visitor log, with my brother's 3 visits highlighted, and mine marked in a separate color, 47 entries over 3 months. Then the Law Society notation about the witnessing notary. Then, last, a side-by-side typographic comparison of the codicil against 3 other documents executed by Mr. Gallagher's office in the same period, showing the font inconsistency in the property description line. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, "The codicil was executed on a day when the deceased lacked testamentary capacity under the Substitute Decisions Act. The document also shows evidence of post-execution alteration, which constitutes fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada, specifically Section 380. We are prepared to file with the Superior Court of Justice and refer the document alteration to the Ontario Provincial Police Fraud Unit simultaneously, if this matter is not resolved today." The room was silent for long enough that I could hear the court reporter's keystrokes. My brother's lawyer asked for a 10-minute recess. They came back in 7. He said his client was open to discussing a resolution. Patricia slid a single document across the table. I had written the first draft myself, because I had spent 8 years reading exactly these kinds of documents, and I knew what language left no room. The codicil was to be formally revoked. The original will was to stand. The house at 44 Elmwood Crescent was to be transferred to my name within 30 days. My brother and my aunt were to acknowledge in writing that they had no further claim to the estate. The cousin who witnessed the codicil was to provide a statutory declaration confirming the circumstances of the signing. If any party violated the terms or pursued further action, the document alteration evidence would be forwarded to the OPP and the Law Society of Ontario, and Patricia would file a civil fraud claim in addition to the probate challenge. There was also a no-contact clause. My brother, my aunt, and my cousin were to have no contact with me, my home, or my workplace. Any breach would trigger automatic referral to the authorities with no further negotiation. My brother looked at me from across the table. It was the first time in that room that he actually looked at me, and not at Patricia, not at the documents, not at his lawyer. He was looking for the girl who used to go quiet at family dinners, who used to nod along, who used to drive 4 hours to sit beside their grandmother while he was busy living his life and showing up to cry at the reception. She was not there. I looked back at him the way I look at a fraudulent filing, with complete professional detachment and total clarity. His hand was not steady when he picked up the pen. My aunt signed without meeting my eyes. My cousin, reached by phone that afternoon, gave the statutory declaration to a notary before 5 o'clock. I drove to Elmwood Crescent that evening. I sat in front of the house for a while without going in. It is a small brick bungalow with a front garden my grandmother tended every spring, the kind of garden that takes 30 years to look that settled. The rose bush by the front step was pruned back for winter, wrapped in burlap the way she always did it in November. I had helped her with that last fall. I remembered kneeling in the cold soil beside her, her hands still steady with the pruning shears even then, telling me that roses need to be cut back hard if you want them to come back strong. I did not know that would be the last autumn she could do it herself. I let myself in with her key. The house smelled like her, lavender and old books and something faintly like cedar. I stood in the front hallway, for a long time. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something quieter than that. Like a debt had been settled that I had been carrying for so long. I had forgotten the original terms. What happened after moved fast. The transfer was registered with the Land Registry Office within the 30-day window. My brother and his girlfriend moved out of the province 4 months later. My aunt stopped attending the family gatherings on my side entirely, which made the gatherings considerably more peaceful. My cousin sent me a text, 6 weeks after the mediation, that said only "I am sorry." I did not respond, but I did not block her either. I still live in Guelph. I still work at the firm, though Patricia has suggested more than once that I have the instincts to sit the Law Society exams and practice myself. Maybe. The house on Elmwood Crescent is rented to a young couple who water the front garden and have not killed the rose bush, which I consider a meaningful sign. I go back on the anniversary of my grandmother's death every February. I sit in the front room where she used to keep her reading chair and her large print novels. and her very strong opinions about Canadian Idol. And I drink tea and I stay for an hour and I let myself remember her clearly, without the noise of everything that came after. She told me once, when I was in my second year at Waterloo and exhausted, and wondering whether any of it was worth it, that the people who try to take what is yours are always counting on you not knowing your own value. She said the best revenge is not anger. She said it is competence. I think about that a lot. Have you ever had to fight for something that should never have been taken in the first place? Tell me in the comments. And if you are reading this from somewhere cold and gray, and you are in the middle of your own quiet fight, tell me where you are. I want to know how far this reaches.